Open your phone for a moment. Scroll back 7 years. Find an old photograph. Not one where you're trying to remember a vacation or celebrate a birthday. Find an ordinary one. A random afternoon. A selfie. A picture someone else took without asking. Now look carefully. The clothes feel unfamiliar. The hairstyle belongs to another era. The smile seems slightly different. Even the way you stand feels unlike you. Then something even stranger happens. You remember what that person believed, what kept that person awake at night, what that person dreamed about, who that person loved, who that person wanted to become. For a brief moment, it almost feels as if you're looking at someone else's life. And perhaps the strangest thought of all quietly appears. If I met that version of myself today, would we even become friends? Most people assume personality is something solid, something you discover once and then simply carry for the rest of your life. People often say, "This is just who I am. I've always been this way. I'll never change." But modern psychology tells a very different story. The person you believe you've always been has never actually existed. Instead, your identity is being rewritten every single day. Not dramatically, not all at once, but so slowly that your brain almost never notices. Imagine watching the hour hand on a clock. You can stare at it for an entire minute without seeing it move, yet return several hours later, and it's somewhere completely different. Personality works much the same way. One conversation rarely changes you. One book rarely changes you. One mistake rarely changes you. One success rarely changes you. But thousands of conversations, hundreds of disappointments, countless tiny decisions, quietly reshape the person looking back at you in the mirror. The remarkable part is that your brain creates the illusion of continuity. Every morning, you wake up feeling like the same person you were yesterday. That feeling is comforting. It's also partly an illusion. Psychologists call this the continuity of self. Your brain stitches together millions of memories into a single ongoing story. Without that story, life would feel chaotic. Imagine waking up every day feeling like a completely different stranger. You would struggle to make decisions. You would question every relationship. You might not even trust your own memories. So your mind performs an extraordinary act of storytelling. It edits. It organizes. It connects. It smooths over contradictions. It convinces you that today's version of you has always been the natural continuation of yesterday's version. Most of the time, that's incredibly useful. But it also hides something fascinating. Every version of you eventually disappears. Not your body, not your name, not your legal identity. Something much quieter. The child who believed adulthood would solve every problem. The teenager who cared desperately about fitting in. The university student convinced success meant proving everyone wrong. The young professional who believed money would finally create peace. None of those people truly vanished overnight. They faded, little by little, like ink left in the sunlight. You never held a funeral for them. You never noticed the exact day they disappeared. One morning, without realizing it, you simply stopped being them. This is one of the greatest psychological illusions of human life. We spend years trying to become someone. Then we spend the next years becoming someone else, and rarely notice either transformation while it's happening. Perhaps that's why returning to an old hometown feels so strange. The streets remain familiar. The buildings haven't moved. The coffee shop still stands on the same corner, yet everything feels different. The town didn't change nearly as much as the person walking through it. In reality, places often become mirrors. They don't reveal how much the world has changed. They reveal how much you have. This raises an uncomfortable question. If the person you were 7 years ago already feels like a stranger, who will the person 7 years from now believe you are today? Perhaps, at this very moment, you're already becoming someone you've never met. If your personality changes so gradually, why does it always feel like you've been the same person all along? The answer lies in one of the brain's most remarkable abilities. It doesn't simply remember your life, it edits it. Most people imagine memory as a library. Every experience is carefully stored. Whenever you need it, you simply pull it off the shelf exactly as it happened. Psychology has repeatedly shown that this isn't how memory works. Memory behaves far more like a documentary that's constantly being re-edited. Every time you remember something, your brain doesn't replay the original recording. It reconstructs it. Then it saves the updated version. That process is known as memory reconsolidation. Imagine reading your favorite book. Each time you finish a chapter, you quietly rewrite a few sentences before putting it back on the shelf. Years later, you believe you're reading the original story, but the story has changed hundreds of times, so have you. This explains something almost everyone has experienced. Think about an embarrassing moment from school. Perhaps you answered a question incorrectly. Perhaps you were rejected by someone you liked. Perhaps you failed an important exam. At the time, those moments felt enormous. They seemed capable of defining your entire future. Yet today, many of them barely matter. The events themselves didn't change. Your interpretation did. As your personality evolved, your memories quietly evolved with it. The older version of you keeps rewriting the younger one. That is why childhood often feels almost mythical. Not because you remember it perfectly, but because your adult mind keeps translating it into a story that makes sense today. Psychologist Dan McAdams describes identity as a life story. According to his research, human beings naturally organize life into narratives. Every setback becomes a chapter. Every relationship becomes a subplot. Every victory becomes a turning point. Without realizing it, you are both the main character and the author. That sounds comforting, until you realize something unsettling. Authors can change the story. Sometimes you remember yourself as shy. Years later, you describe yourself as independent. Then, after another decade, you begin saying you've always been resilient. Which version is true? Perhaps all of them. Or perhaps none of them completely are. Because personality isn't a finished sculpture carved from stone. It's more like a river. The river always has the same name. People point to it and say, "That's the same river." Yet every drop of water has already moved on. The identity you carry works in remarkably similar ways. There is continuity, but there is also constant replacement. This becomes especially obvious during major life transitions: graduating, moving to another country, falling in love, losing someone, becoming a parent, changing careers, recovering from failure. These moments rarely change your personality overnight. Instead, they alter thousands of tiny habits, different conversations, different routines, different responsibilities, different priorities. Eventually, those small adjustments accumulate into someone new. The transformation feels invisible while it is happening. Only hindsight makes it obvious. This is why many people experience an unexpected shock during school reunions. Everyone expects to meet the people they once knew. Instead, they meet strangers wearing familiar faces. The confident student becomes quiet. The quiet student becomes adventurous. The class clown becomes a thoughtful father. The ambitious perfectionist discovers peace in a simple life. Nothing magical happened. Life simply continued doing what it always does, changing people one ordinary day at a time. Ironically, the people who insist, "I never change," are often the ones whose stories have been edited the most. Because believing you've stayed the same gives your mind a comforting sense of stability. Yet underneath that stability, your values shift. Your fears soften. Your priorities rearrange themselves. Your definition of success evolves. Your relationships reshape your beliefs. Your disappointments teach lessons your younger self could never have imagined. The greatest changes in personality almost never arrive as dramatic revolutions. They arrive as ordinary Tuesdays, a conversation that changes how you see your parents, a book that quietly rewrites your ambitions, a friendship that teaches trust, a heartbreak that teaches boundaries, a mistake that teaches humility. None of these moments announce themselves as life-changing. Only years later do you realize they became part of someone entirely different. And perhaps that's the most beautiful part of growing older. You don't wake up one morning and become another person. You become another person, so slowly, that your brain kindly allows you to believe you've been that person all along. Perhaps this explains one of the strangest experiences in adult life. One day, someone reminds you of who you used to be. Maybe an old friend tells a story you had forgotten. Maybe your parents laugh about a habit you no longer have. Maybe you find a journal written years ago. You recognize the handwriting. You recognize the name. But somehow, you don't completely recognize the person. It feels almost impossible that those words came from your own mind. The dreams seem different. The fears seem unfamiliar. Even the opinions sound like they belong to someone else. Many people find this unsettling, but psychology suggests something much more hopeful. You are not supposed to remain the same person forever. In fact, healthy development almost guarantees that you won't. Research on personality development consistently shows that people tend to become more emotionally stable, more conscientious, and often more agreeable as they grow older. Not because age magically creates wisdom, but because life continuously teaches lessons that cannot be learned any other way. Failure teaches patience. Love teaches vulnerability. Responsibility teaches discipline. Loss teaches gratitude. None of these experiences simply add information. They change the person receiving it. Imagine trying to write the same chapter of a book over and over again. Eventually, the story would stop moving. The character would stop growing. Readers would lose interest. Life works differently. Every challenge quietly asks the same question. Who will you become because of this? Notice the wording. Not, what will you achieve? Not, what will you own? Not, what title will you earn? But, who will this experience shape you into? That question changes everything. Because achievements eventually become memories. Careers change. Relationships evolve. Homes are sold. Children grow up. Even the dreams that once consumed your entire identity eventually become stories you tell. Character remains. Perhaps that is why some of the wisest people rarely introduce themselves by listing accomplishments. They don't begin with awards, or salaries, or followers. Instead, they speak about curiosity, kindness, resilience, humility. These are not achievements. They are ways of being. And unlike goals, they never truly reach a finish line. This also changes how we should think about our future selves. Psychologists have discovered that many people imagine their future self almost like another person. Someone wiser, someone happier, someone who finally has everything figured out. But your future self isn't waiting somewhere ahead. That person is quietly being built by today's smallest decisions. Every conversation you choose to have, every book you decide to read, every apology you finally make, every fear you confront, every act of kindness no one notices, every ordinary Tuesday that feels too insignificant to matter. Those moments rarely feel transformational. Yet they are. Not because they instantly change your life, but because they slowly change the person living it. Perhaps this is why looking back 7 years feels so surprising. You never noticed yourself changing. You simply kept living. Then one day, you looked in the mirror of memory and discovered someone you no longer completely recognized. Now imagine someone else. A person standing exactly 7 years in the future. That person opens an old photo. Today's photo. They smile. Not because your life was perfect. Not because you had already figured everything out. But because they can see the beginning of someone they have become grateful to be. That person is you. Which means the question isn't whether your personality will change. It will. The real question is far more important. What kind of person is today's version of you quietly creating? Because every habit becomes a vote. Every decision becomes a sentence. Every year becomes another chapter. And one day, without ever noticing the exact moment it happened, you will become someone your younger self could never have imagined. Perhaps growing older isn't about finding your true self. Perhaps there was never one fixed self to find. Perhaps life has always been something much more beautiful. A story that is never finished. A character that is never complete. A personality that never stops being rewritten. And maybe that's exactly as it should be. Because the greatest version of yourself should never be the one you've already been. It should always be the one you're still becoming.